Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Prieto, and I'm the co-founder of Seeds of Tao, alongside my husband, Joshua Prieto. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast for impact entrepreneurs creating regenerative enterprises. We often get asked what exactly a regenerative enterprise or impact entrepreneur is. So if you're wondering, a regenerative enterprise builds triple bottom line profits through the practice of ethics and principles that lead to a more inclusive, fair, and balanced economy. Impact entrepreneurs, or regenpreneurs as we like to call them, are those willing and able to take on the financial and personal risks of starting and building regenerative enterprises. You'll get to know exactly what all that means as you join us for this and future episodes, but know that we welcome everyone to join us as we work to build regenerative economies together. That's exactly why we're doing what we do at Seeds of Tao. Our mission is to help establish regenerative economies in every bioregion by serving individual regenpreneurs like yourself. In this podcast, you'll hear the startup stories in all their glory from impact entrepreneurs all over the globe. You'll learn and grow the skills of building a regenerative enterprise from your peers, mentors, and leaders. Finally, we'll get to know each other as you engage in the podcast and join the wonderful regenerative business economies ecosystem, aka Regen B, an open community where peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenpreneurs come together to build the regenerative economies of the future. Join us every month for a wonderful episode as we collectively move beyond sustainability and into our regenerative future. It all starts now.
Welcome back to the Seeds of Tao podcast. Man, it has been a while. I think the last episode was beginning of the year in February. A lot has happened since we last posted an episode to the Seeds of Tao podcast. I have been trying to get back to the podcast for a little while, but now I have a co-host with me, and Noam Rifkin is going to be my co-host for the next foreseeable future as we really start to dive into all of the wonderful things happening in the ecosystem of regenerative business. And really playing on that, the regenerative business economics, regenerative business economics ecosystem is really what we're building on, the Regen B. Noam has been working with me on that. Noam, if you can, just give us a little bit of an intro to you, because this is like the first time people are hearing you on the podcast, and a little bit of why you're involved in the Regen B work and now Seeds of Tao with the podcast, and then let's give us a little bit of a preamble for our conversation today that I had a really long time ago. So it's like a time capsule at this point, but you got to listen to it, and I would love to get your thoughts on Mad Capital and what they're doing. So let's start it off. No,
pleasure to be here. I think between this podcast being a phoenix rising back to life and my journey into kind of being your co-host, like, pretty good proof that all regenerative transitions can take a little bit of time and patience and may not necessarily be straight lines. But I'm really excited to be joining you and to be talking about this going forward. It's a really, really wonderful opportunity. And, I've been getting introduced into the, I'll say the regenerative world over the last, 9 months or so, working closely with you, Josh, working with a lot of the great people at like Evolute 6 and, around the ecosystem. And, every day includes a conversation where I learn something new. And every day, includes a conversation where I get to share my unique perspective coming from, archaeology and then digital marketing, that well-worn career path. And moving into, this idea of regenerative entrepreneurship and wanting to both achieve positive ends for the world, for nature, for ecosystem, but also not, intentionally taking a vow of poverty and realizing that regenerating financial capital allows you to have a continued and larger impact. And if a regenerative business can support itself, it's that much less strain it needs to put on the rest of the ecosystem in order to support itself. And that means it can have that much stronger of an impact going forward. So that's my perspective on things. And, I'm really looking forward to the conversations we're going to get to have on this podcast, the people we're going to get to talk to.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is kind of a fun episode to kind of restart our journey on. I really like the folks at Mad Capital, Brandon, and you got to remind me who else. Phil, Brandon and Phil. Goodness. It's been almost a year and a half since we had this original conversation with them. I really enjoyed just how involved they are in the movement and how much they live it, right? They really have that ethos. And so just from a perspective of like, these are really two great guys, I wanted to have a conversation with them, but also the work that they're doing is really intriguing. Like they're really getting some fun stuff done within Mad Capital. So if you can, since you just listened to it, give us your thoughts, Noam. What's happening? Give us some context and what the audience should expect, and what should we actually do on the coattails of this? Because I know it's a time capsule. What other conversations do we need to have with Mad Capital?
Yeah, that's a great lead-in. So my first thought was the bar is higher than I anticipated to join this podcast because, Josh, you're a pretty effective interviewer, and that was a really well-paced conversation. And I think you did an excellent job of kind of directing their thoughts to the topics that were going to resonate with the audience that we have, kind of most broadly, most strongly, right? It's interesting. While I was listening to it, I was just kind of looking around at their recent social media activity, both individually and as Mad Capital, right? And it's been about 16 months since you recorded this, right? A little over a year. And as I was listening to it, I'm thinking to myself, they're not necessarily using the same vocabulary that some of the other people we might have talked to would be using around regenerative financing or regenerative capital, but their perspectives and the metrics that they're paying attention to are in lockstep alignment with the same regenerative principles that we've talked about, on however many Zoom calls we've had since we first met. Right. And it's a little bit of an assumption, obviously, like we're not in their boardroom or anything like that, but it's easy to, or clear at least, to look at their, activities and acquisitions, expansions, focuses since that conversation and see how they are applying regenerative financing principles, right? But, you have a really concise exchange with them during the conversation where they talk about their kind of 3 time horizons that they're evaluating on. I think you refer to it as like the orbit shot, the moon shot, and the star shot. Mm-hmm. And it's a really effective reminder that progress isn't linear, and success, you can define your parameters beforehand, but that locks you into one version of success, right? If you understand, as Phil and Brandon really clearly seem to have internalized, right, that you're looking to influence an ecosystem, a matrix of interconnected factors, levers, processes, and you can kind of say the overall impact is reflected in the health of X, Y, or Z, it gets a lot easier to open up all these additional opportunities for yourself, for you to deploy the financial capital that you're able to raise, centralize, grow, regenerate, right? So I think just as we're, kind of at the beginning of this process of understanding the current state of the RegenB community and what we're trying to build towards and the types of stakeholders and their concerns that are kind of arrayed around that, I think this is a incredibly, kind of pertinent conversation for us to listen back into. And I'll kind of leave my preamble there.
Yeah. So let's Let's dive into it.
Welcome to the Seeds of Tao podcast. I have two really great guests today that we get to talk about a side of regeneration that's maybe doesn't get spoken of enough. And so we're going to dive into their story. But I have Philip Taylor and Brandon Welch of Mad Capital on the podcast today. How are you two doing today?
We are good. Yeah. Excited to be here. Thanks for the invite and happy to share our story.
Cool.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah. We're excited.
Yeah. So the way we like to get these podcasts rolling is to get to know you just more personally. And I think the best way to do that is just kind of get a little day in the life of you guys. So Brandon, maybe you start, or Philip, whoever wants to start. What got you up this morning? And just tell us a bit about your day and how it's going.
Yeah. Still relatively early here in Mountain Time in Boulder, Colorado. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So I've been up for a couple of hours. Woke up, I'm in my mornings, I'm fairly just regimented and kind of just disciplined about how I go about the day. So like I'm up, alarm goes off at 6. I'm out of the bed, at 6, 6 and 7 seconds. And then, usually I'll stretch for call it 15, 20 minutes, just kind of wake the body up, get moving, maybe do a little breath work. And then I hopped in the shower, got ready to hop into the office and get on this podcast. Got to the office a little early, chatted with Phil for a little while. We caught up, just kind of sensed where we were both at, energy wise, how we were feeling for the day. We have a Europe fundraising trip coming up next week. So we're just, really making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. And yeah, I'm feeling good. Other mornings could wake up and, hit the gym, go on a trail run. Usually like to do some sort of just physical activity to kind of get my body moving, get my mind working. So most days start with some sort of a nature-based or outdoor, just physical endeavor.
Right.
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling. How about you?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. I use my mornings similarly. I have a fairly robust meditation practice that takes me about 30 minutes. And so I've been training in that for a while now, and that's sort of my core anchor point in the morning. I get up, I have 4 kids and a lovely wife. And so I rise before the whole sort of family gets moving. And today I left before anyone was up. I like occasionally, I used to get into the office early all the time, but now that I'm more in dad mode, I typically get in around like 8:30. And yeah, it was beautiful. I live up in the mountains above Boulder, and so I have this beautiful canyon drive. So I get to wiggle down the canyon alongside this beautiful creek that I like to plunge in. And it's just a beautiful way to wake up. So that's kind of my daily routine, meditation and creek drive and drop the kids off at school and get in the saddle and rock and roll.
Right on. I'm familiar with the area, at least, because I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and so I love that kind of mountain life. Right. I kind of miss it a little bit being here in Panama, but yeah. Are you guys skiers or climbers or what's do you have any particular outdoor activities that you guys like to do?
Definitely. Yeah. I like to get into the backcountry. So I did a little skin with a buddy on Sunday, went up to Caribou just outside of Netherlands, and, was outside for 3 or 4 hours, just doing some laps on kind of the local incline there. Got some awesome powder in the summer, mountain biking, trail running, hiking. I just enjoy all sorts of outdoor recreation. I was into rock climbing at one point. That's faded a little bit. The time intensity to maintain a level of excellence in rock climbing is really high. Like you have to be very dedicated in order to maintain peak performance there. Whereas other things, mountain biking, I can just hop on once or twice a week. I don't need to be focusing 20 hours a week on, strengthening my fingers and such. So I do that every once in a while, but that's kind of faded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love a lot of the same things. The thing that I've been most drawn to, I call it kind of like adventure days. And I basically pack a backpack with sort of no trail or chart, known, and put watercolors and a journal and binoculars and some plant identification guides. And I just kind of cut loose with my kids up hills and down mountains and sort of get lost exploring nature. And, before I was kind of turned conscious capitalist, I was an ecologist for 15 years, studying rainforests. And so I have this, we'll get into it, but I have this like very deep curiosity itch around how ecosystems are structured and how they function and where that beauty, sort of comes into being. And so it ties deeply into my like sense of place. And so there's this sort of like undying love for adventure and ecological curiosity. And so that's my go-to, is the sort of adventure days. That's my thing.
That sounds like a dad way of saying it too. Adventure days. I'm just picking up on that a little bit.
It's a little hard. Yeah. I mean, I wake my kids up at like 6 a.m. I usually have like the burritos warm and the coffee and the hot chocolate. And then we hop in the truck and then we go. And, they usually bring the pillows and sleep in the truck, and I have to wake them up at the trailhead or whatever. And, they smile kind of, and, we get going. Yeah. It's super fun. I mean, it's one of those things where like when you wake up in the morning and you have that alpine start, like you never regret it.
No.
It's like you never regret an early morning wake, even though it can be really hard. When you get back to the house and it's like only 1 p.m, you're like, whoa, I've like lived an entire day. That like sort of deep satisfaction that comes with that commitment and that devotion. So yeah, I like to kind of relish in that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. We do a lot of hiking and stuff. We did a lot of skiing as a family, but we also did a lot of winter and summer hikes in the mountains in Salt Lake area. I have 4 kids myself, so I kind of get those adventure days going. My kids don't always want to go up with me, and they grunt, but when we get back, it's always like, oh man, that was awesome, or wow, look at what we saw today, or I found all of these things. They come back with like 50 pine cones and all sorts of different, rocks and whatnot.
Yeah, dude. Our whole house is full of branches and rocks and seashells. I literally have like a ton of nature collections in my garage. It dominates the sort of storage capacity of the back garage, is just collections of bones and rocks and stuff. It's it brings up a lot of like, what is responsible foraging? There's like all kinds of philosophical debates that happen. And anyway, it's one of my richest parts of life for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's about connection with nature too. And when you're young, I think there's some amount of allowing for a little bit of disruption, to be able to have that connection. I don't know, that's my 2 cents on that, but it's good. It's good to just get to know you a little bit before we dive into your story. So yeah, Brandon, tell me more about what gets you excited to do the work that you do at Mad Capital.
Yeah, for sure. What gets me excited is really the tangible real world difference that we're helping our farmers create. I think society now is very focused on the digital, on social media, on kind of hyper growth, on VC, on this mentality of always trying to get more for less. And farming and really just agriculture as a whole is rooted in a much longer relationship with the work. And the work has real world physical outcomes, and being able to show up on a farm that I haven't been to for 3 or 4 years and just see that we helped provide right fit capital to help that farmer transition their land. And now the farmer's happier, the land is healthier, the soil is richer, is invigorating for me. It's exciting. It's empowering to see that, we're helping connect these 2 worlds that are fairly distant right now, being, Wall Street and institutional capital with, stewards who have a multi-generational mindset. We actively live in that tension, and being able to successfully bridge those 2 worlds and then help a farmer transition land to organic is exciting. And that gives me passion, that gets me going. And, when times get tough, when we're in kind of the chaos and the struggle of building a company and in entrepreneurship, It's really being able to reflect and think about those moments that, reground me and, get me excited again about the work. But that's what drives a lot of my passion.
Right on. And Phil, for you, what excites you about your work with Mad Capital?
Oh man, there's so many things. I'll give you a couple like kind of little nuggets. One is like the philosophical and psycho-emotional challenge of like reimagining money and capital. There's like a very robust like inner landscape within the team around like what is economy, what is money for, and how should money flow. And so, a lot of what we're doing in my mind is like trying to connect money and its utility to like the natural and economic and ecological flows of ecosystems. Like what is sort of the natural interest rate of an ecosystem? How much money can things bear? Like there's all sorts of interesting like tissue in that conversation. So like there's like a super rich part of our work that's sort of philosophical and curious. And I would say it's not polemical or dogmatic. It's sort of asking the questions and trying to practice these things in real time. And so that's a really fun intellectual and emotional spiritual exercise that brings me a lot of life. And then on the other end of the spectrum, sort of similar to what Brandon was saying, is like there's a very practical outcome, and I think like ideas without action are dead. And so, how do we move that philosophy into practice? And I love this idea of like living the questions. And so I think living the questions is like working with your hands, it's putting things to work. And so when we lend to farmers, it's real stuff. I mean, these are livelihoods, it's family, it's land transformation, it's real transition to organic and regenerative ag. Systems, economies, ecosystems are changing because of it. And to like feel and witness that and be a partner in that is like it's an honor. It fills me with gratitude, excitement. It's full of challenge. And so the sort of like philosophical to the practical, and all the stuff in between, really brings me a lot of joy. I would say the last thing is, it's just really cool to watch the people on the team here just rise to the occasion, building the systems, the practices, the servicing, the way we underwrite, the way we understand risk, the way that we take risk. Like our meetings that sort of really get into the weeds and the guts of, what is private credit, just fills our days, with a lot of energy and verve. And so that's really fun to witness a team of people coming together to really reform that in a positive way toward regeneration.
That's so cool. The combination of your guys' the two of you answering, I think, Brandon, it felt like you're enjoying seeing the progress of the farms and things moving forward, and that progress inspires you, and then Phil, the challenges and like working through those challenges, like and seeing that happen, I think it is something that's inspiring you. And what I kind of took away from both your answers is there's like this always being able to see what's coming and what's being created, but there's this the enjoyment in actually like solving that challenge right now is also something that really enlivens you guys.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks for sharing. What gets you excited? Tell us more about Mad Capital and the work, the actual tangible work that you guys are doing now that we've kind of had an understanding that's working with what gets you excited about it.
For sure. Yeah. So Mad Capital, we're on a mission to create a regenerative organic revolution in agriculture. So what that means is we are trying to use capital as a tool to help empower farmers on their regenerative journey. And as they try to transition land from conventional chemical-based synthetic, kind of much more industrial agriculture to regenerative organic agriculture, which is positive from a human health standpoint, These farmers are growing chemical-free food in a way that's putting carbon in the ground. It's improving biodiversity. There are more, birds and bees and life on the farm, and it's mitigating all of the eutrophication and water issues that these more industrial farms are creating. So our mission is really to connect the two worlds of capital and farmers and stewards of the land in order to help them have right fit, properly structured debt to facilitate that transition. So we're a lender. We're a private credit shop where we provide long-term fixed rate and flexible financing for farmers to make that transition. So farmers have all sorts of challenges or hurdles that they have to overcome in their transition. It's occasionally capital. It's occasionally access to markets. It can also be access to the right information and having the place-based wisdom to make a good, successful transition. But when it is capital, we are working on cultivating the right capital stacks that are really designed for organic transition. So these are loans that are on interest-only terms, have deferred terms, or we sculpt the payment schedule. So what I mean by that is we'll alter the payment schedule of the loan to best fit the cash flow of the farm. Because during the transition to regenerative organic, the cash flow of the farm suffers. It usually is reduced roughly 20 to 30% below the break-even point. So if a farmer goes in their community bank, their traditional kind of farm credit system lending institution, they're usually on much shorter terms with less flexibility, and they're demanding a higher amount of repayment too early. That doesn't allow for the regenerative organic transition to successfully increase resilience and increase profitability of the farm. So by MadCap having I'd say the way we originate capital is more aligned with just ecological cycles and the tempo that nature tends to beat to. That's where we can really help enable successful transitions. So in MadCap, as of today, we're working in roughly 16 states, over about 79,000 acres of farmland, in helping our farmers transition about 10,500 acres to certified organic. And that's with about 30 producers, mostly row crop farmers, but also we do work with some grass-fed, grass-finished, pasture-based operations, as well as some specialty operations like cotton farmer and some unique vegetable like popcorn, for example. So it's a little bit about MadCap, where we're at. You want to add anything to that, Phil?
No, that was pretty comprehensive. I would say that, and just to add something there would be, a lot of the most forward, progressive farmers in what they are trying to do is not understandable from a traditional banking perspective. We've heard story after story where a farmer will enter the bank and literally get sort of laughed out of the bank. We hear stories of farmers, really being sort of dismissed by their communities. There's a real, I think, especially in rural communities where a lot of people tend to do the same thing. When you begin to do something different, the level of human judgment can rise very quickly. And that level of human judgment for sort of bucking the system can be seen through everything from the local coffee shop to like the banker's office. And so folks that are kind of, pushing out on the edges of change are usually unwelcome, and they're often iconoclastic, and they have to like sort of, build that courage to sort of be disliked. And so when Mad Capital shows up, there's often this huge amount of kind of mushy gushy camaraderie, where you're like, whoa, where are you from? I'm so glad you're here. Like, what's up? And it's like a human connection that often is like part of the genesis or origination of the relationship that yields this like wonderful kind of sense of camaraderie and movement building, like we're in it together. And so, which is true. I mean, that's how we approach things. We really do approach it as building a revolution in ag, which, in so many ways is community based. And so yeah, I would just say that there's like this kind of wonderful ethos around that sort of pervades the way that we work.
Yeah, because if you think about it, only 1 out of 100 farmers are certified organic in the U.S. So these types of farmers are rare. They're just out on the prairie, usually lone dogs, not feeling like they have any sort of support. So that's where, it's like suddenly like they've been searching in the dark with a flashlight, like they come across us. It's, it's a little exhilarating and it's exciting for us too. I mean, we love meeting new farmers, hearing their story, understanding how they're approaching transition and, their mindset, and then being able to hopefully work with them and, support them to go further faster. So it's exciting for both because we're both farmers and MadCap are focused on a small niche. It's not for everybody. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel that camaraderie just kind of being the regenerative movement is very, very niche and few and far apart, right? All over the world, really. And so you get it, I tried doing an off-grid farmstead with my wife. We failed at it miserably. But while we were doing that in our community, we got so much grief around what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we always had to explain, 10 times more than what we thought we were supposed to be explaining to them. And just to even be accepted within our Montana community. Right. So yeah, I definitely feel that. And when seeing the work that you guys are doing, I would definitely be like, yes, this is so amazing. Please. I want more of you. And where have you been all my life? Right. So let's get to the story time on this, and let's take us back wherever you guys want to start the story is perfect. But tell us, how did you get to this point building Mad Capital and where you're at today?
Good question. I'll kick it off. Yeah, I'll kick it off and you can riff. So man, it's tempting to start on like the childhood like land, which maybe I'll do briefly, which is, I grew up in Maryland in this really wonderful ecological just place that I think at a young age, I came into this awareness that, how we steward the earth through agriculture basically shapes how the earth is used. And so, my love for everything from like blue crabs to like, horseshoe crabs and herring and shad and the beautiful ecosystems that I was falling in love with as a kid, I realized that like their greatest detriment was the agricultural practices that, sort of surrounded me. And so I grew up working on farms, was very well acquainted with it. And I thought that my like sort of purpose in life was to be an ecologist, to understand their beauty and how they function. And I spent 15 years as an ecologist, really deeply exploring, natural ecosystems and really how to protect them and what's the basis for conservation. And eventually I got to a point in the kind of academic vein of ecology where I was just sort of over serving the cerebral side of things and felt that my gifts and my passions were much better suited by thinking more holistically about how I could show up in the world. And, I tend to be someone that shows up as an artist and as a poet and as a community builder and, in academia, just crunching data all the time to publish papers. It was highly limiting. And so 2016, I had a bit of a dark night of the soul. Not a bit. I had a dark night of the soul, 2 nervous breakdowns, full spiral into the vortex. I'd never struggled deeply with depression, but as I've looked back on that time, I was really struggling as an individual to take all of this sort of bubbling goodness and light that was in my soul and figure out how to translate it into like practical work. I tried a couple things. I failed at them really miserably. I spent a lot of money. I drug my wife and my kids through a lot of stressful times. And I still had like no answers around what I was going to do. And I was like, my God. And then in that kind of dark moment, I went back to some of the sort of wisdom keepers that I like to lean on, Wendell Berry and Terry Tempest Williams and Mary Oliver and John Kabat-Zinn. And, the list goes on. And in that kind of reapproach to those wisdom keepers, I stumbled back on the Mad Farmer poems. And the Mad Farmer poems are these amazing poems that Wendell Berry wrote in the late 70s that call humanity to this radical reimagination, of society and economy based on love, reciprocity, community values, place-based wisdom, ecological principles. And they have this like healthy dose of like, it's an invitation to be slightly insane, right? Like, let's play at the margins. Let's play at the edges. I believe change comes from the margins. And so, I loved the sort of spirit of those poems, the way they resonated. And then out of that, in 2017, 18, really began thinking about forming Mad Ag, which is a nonprofit. So Mad Agriculture, Mad Capital spun out of Mad Agriculture, the nonprofit. And I'll get to there in a second. But essentially, Mad Ag started as just a gathering and community base for farmers in the Front Range of Colorado. We would gather farmers into an old Grange hall. We would cover everything from carbon farming to philosophy around kind of capital and money, all the way to like practical policy things, related to hoop house heights, in the Boulder area. Like we were kind of covering all these zones, and somewhat unconsciously during that period, what I realized we were doing in hindsight was that we were approaching agriculture and the problems that farmers and ranchers face with a really high dose of empathy. And we were learning a ton about their challenges because we were listening with our like deepest hearts. We were really giving our all to say, what is up? How can we support you? And then out of those learnings, Mad Ag started to find purchase. We started to find like our feet below us, and we started running. And, what we've come to learn is that there are kind of four big barriers. I mean, there's a lot of barriers, but there are four big barriers that we're addressing that we feel like if we can help farmers and ranchers overcome these barriers, there's a good chance that change is going to be successful and it's going to happen rapidly. And Mad Ag, the nonprofit, started and still works really in kind of that boots on the ground, land and business planning, thought partnership side of things. So a lot of farmers, or they have an idea about where to go, where they want to take risks, where they want to build this new ecosystem, but they often struggle crossing that idea into action. I mean, even myself, when I plant cover crops in my little 2 raised beds in the hills, I'll spend like 2 or 3 hours just Googling cover crops, and I'm thinking like, farmers who pull their livelihood from a landscape, transformation is really daunting. And so, a lot of the way the nonprofit works is that kind of thought partnership that comes alongside, supports, and helps de-risk those kind of early actions. And so that's the core of the nonprofit. We also do a lot of storytelling in the nonprofit. We believe that story or myth or narrative is absolutely critical to animating the revolution. A revolution doesn't happen because of data and facts. It happens because your soul longs for something. And so we're very cognizant that the revolution needs to be beautiful. It needs to be irresistible. It needs to be delicious. It needs to be fun. It needs to be attractive financially and otherwise. It needs to build community. So like a lot of our nonprofit work plays in those realms. And I think we're just kind of getting started with it. We have this like rich ethos about it, and we're just starting to flirt with like, what does that actually look like? I'll wrap it up here kind of quickly because I can be loquacious. But where to migrate? Okay. So we're migrating across the office because we need to let other people in the office work. But yeah, so the thing that I'll wrap up about and say is that out of that nonprofit work, we also learned that without money, it's very difficult to make these changes. It became very practical, where we would often be ideating with a farmer on the land, and you're like, okay, here's an awesome vision, but where am I going to get the money? And so what that led us to do was to think about where does money come into a farm and how does it come into a farm? And essentially, money comes into a farm in two ways. It comes in to the farm through where you sell your crops, livestock, and or fiber, through the markets that you have access to. And then it also comes into the farm through where do you get your financing. Some farmers have equity financing with partners, but by and large, most farmers have debt financing. And so what we realized is there was a huge opportunity to start reimagining both the marketplace side of things as well as the capital and financing side of things. And so I won't dive into the markets right now, but what we realized on the capital side is that a lot of farmers, especially that are transitioning to organic, they go through this valley of death where, they'll go into the red during those 3 years of transition. They've pulled the chemistry, the chemicals out of the farm system. Their yields perhaps drag down. And during that period, while they're rebuilding soil health and investing in natural capital, they're spending money and more money than they're making. And so a lot of banks, who operate under the principle of getting like principal and interest at the end of the year with an annual note, an organic farmer comes in the door and they're like, what do you mean you're not going to pay me back for 3 years? And it's just sort of confusing. And so what we realized is that there was an opportunity for us to not radically reimagine finance, but to change some financial products to be better tuned to the business model of organic farmers. And with that simple tweaking, we have found incredible resonance. That kind of tweaking of the financial product, which meets our kind of values alignment and our commitment to the cause, that sort of suite of features of how we show up has really, really given us a lot of like rocket boost to be successful. So that's a little bit about the sort of longer origin story. About 5 years ago, I met Brandon in a coffee house and we just hit it off. And I'll let him tell his story and entry point into the work.
Right on.
Great. Yeah. So met Phil about 5 years ago. It was November of 2017. Had just moved to Boulder, kind of only a few months prior, and I was working in carbon markets and was working to help figure out how to put carbon in the ground or mitigate carbon through these more kind of traditional carbon offset markets. These are all, climate action reserved, qualified projects like methane capture, avoided grassland, things of that nature. And along the way, right before I had met Phil, I had learned a lot of the problems with carbon markets around double counting, around effectively auditing the project, and around additionality, and really trying to figure out if it was the highest and best use of, really society's energy, and if carbon offsets were going to solve, the climate issue that we're facing. So I was already having a lot of these thoughts, and then I met up with Phil at Trident in downtown Boulder, and he was deep into the work of figuring out what MAD was going to be and trying to sort out what the best and highest use of his energy would be to help more farmers transition to regenerative ag. So then throughout 2018, we really just went on, a learning journey of trying to understand all of the different problems that farmers were facing across, access to capital, markets, place, and, information. And, that's what resulted in, forming multiple entities that we have now across the nonprofit, MAD markets, and MAD capital. But early on, when we were really starting to hear that access to capital was a challenge, we thought the solution was potentially going to be carbon markets. If a farmer can make $20, $30, $40 an acre additional on top line, that should be enough value in order to drive or incentivize change on farm. But early on to that, we discovered a lot of the challenges with MRV and specifically additionality and row crop systems that make that just it'd be a multi-decade endeavor that we didn't think we were best suited for. And we also discovered the difference between the value, at least financial value creation, that organic farmers can have compared to conventional. So organic farmers can typically sell their crops for roughly 2x that of conventional, which ends up driving substantial profit margins for organic producers. So, we believe that in order to create real durable change, you've got to be able to create the right financial incentives to ensure that all stakeholders, are aligned, and that we're able to create enough of a carrot to create, mass scaling transformation. And the difference between an organic farmer being able to add $1,000 to their top line compared to a regenerative conventional farmer adding $20 or $30 to the top line from carbon markets is just, it's substantial. So it was obvious to us to start focusing on where the bigger gap was. And then over the preceding, 3 years, we decided to, one evening we were in our co-working space, and we decided to launch a fund and call it the Perennial Fund. So, we bought the domain, theperennialfund.com. That made it official. Once you have the website, then you have to commit to it. So from there, we ended up applying to a large grant from the conservation. We got a conservation innovation grant from the NRCS. It was about $1.8 million that allowed us to actually launch the initial funds to try to find product market fit, to validate if these ideas and theories that we had were actually going to be practical in the real world. And, the rest is, history at this point. I mean, we raised a $10 million fund one, we deployed that. We're now in market raising a fund two. We've got great farmers. We've got a great community of investors, and, the wheel is really spinning at this point. But, it all started with an idea, and then being able to just root that down into the real world. And, it was messy and confusing and I think we were entirely unsure if it was going to work. I mean, we believed it would work, but, we can't have certainty in that. And I think our willingness to just kind of plunge into the unknown and, figure it out along the way and be adaptable is really what allowed us to get to where we are today. So I feel grateful that, it has worked out. 'Cause I mean, there have been moments along the road where if certain stars didn't align, we would not be, in this office today with a team. So it does take a little bit of luck as well in order to keep the ball rolling.
For sure. I think that's with any venture, nonprofit, for profits. It's all about it's the luck, it's the risk that you're taking on. It's about the dedication. All of those kind of come into line.
Oh yeah. That's all of it.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into that, I think, a little bit, but the tenacity that it takes to build something and launch something in the world, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, or whatever you're creating, it is not for the faint of heart. And you have to go all the way. Mm-hmm. You have to go all the way. And even if you do, you might not make it. It's that risk taking, the sort of luck. You can create some luck, but some of it is truly out of your control. And so, yeah, it's been a really wild journey, and one that I'm grateful for. I feel like we're actually like not cruising altitude, but we sort of the rocket boosters we can shed the rocket boosters, I think, in the next 18 months.
Okay.
We can sort of let them fall, and we can say, we've hit exit velocity. We have that in our horizon of view.
Yeah, it is at that moment where it's like the spaceship is shaking, space and entering orbit is right there, and we're so close to being able to just exit the atmosphere. Yeah. So it's, for us, it's kind of this final moment of, and well, probably not final, but a really hard push over the next, 6 to 18 months to just get into orbit. And, it's been 5 years now leading up to these moments, but it does feel like it's right there. But yeah, as Phil was saying, I mean, having kind of a burn the ships mentality is what it takes. I mean, we're all in. It's either going to be a 1 or a 0. It's not this kind of, I hope it works out. It's, we're putting all of our focus to watch this one egg, and we're going to take care of it, and it's going to work out. But being able to have that grit day after day is, it's challenging. I mean, it can be a little wearing too. So it's just and this is something that I'm actively kind of living through and trying to sort out how to have the right relationship with, like the ability to drive and work hard, but then also, be able to relax and live a good life at the same time, which is probably the perennial issue of all entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's take a moment for a brief promotional break and talk about the state of our world. There are famines, floods, and fires in our backyards, a global recession affecting our economies, and war and conflict tearing down our relationships with one another. You see it in the news, feel it in your wallet, and talk about it in your social networks. It's hard to think that it doesn't affect you in your personal life and bring you down in your work. Except you want to regenerate our lands, turn our economies into circular ones, and do it in collaboration and community with others. How are you supposed to do that when it seems like everyone's working against you? You're an entrepreneur and you have a business that's going to help us solve these problems and bring these solutions? You're telling me you're going to change people's minds and raise capital for your cause and bring in triple bottom line profits? You must be an optimist, a dreamer, or completely out of touch. Who's going to buy your products or services, take you up on that offer, or help you fund your do-good business? We will. Who are we? We are the Regenerative Business Economies Network, a connected group of impact entrepreneurs, peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenerative enterprise building. Together, we take on the financial and personal risks of building regenerative enterprises. It's all of us together that creates the change we want to see. We must believe in each other and the work we've devoted ourselves to. If you want to be supported and also lend support to impact entrepreneurs like yourself, follow the promotional link in the podcast description or head over to seedsofdao.com and click on Join the Community. With that, let's get back to the episode.
Well, I'm curious, and maybe we can dive into this for just a moment for all of us listening and going through that entrepreneurial endeavor. I love how you guys were talking about. I always say this to clients. What is the orbit shot, moon shot, and star shot that you're looking for, right? And kind of giving. And so, like, what does it kind of look like as you're like gaining traction, getting out, and you kind of feel like, okay, we got some breathing room. And then what is it right after that? I think is also kind of a fun exploratory thought experiment of like, okay, we just made it out of orbit. Now you kind of feel like you're comfortable. You sit down in that comfortable mode, or were you guys heading out from there, right? Because there's still a destination, right? Are you going to the moon? Are you going to the stars? What is that?
Yeah.
And so maybe we can go there. But before we do, you mentioned Brandon. I think you kind of put us in that space of like, you got to manage ourselves of finding the balance of like really pushing and then enjoying life around us. There's so many entrepreneurs that I speak to in the regenerative realm, especially because I think that they do a little bit more of a martyr syndrome, right, in their work, that they burn out before they get to even a place of like an orbit shot, right? And so like they're grinding, they can maybe even see space up there and that they can get to that point, but they're not, they burn out right before they're there, and they explode, or something happens right before that moment of just kind of getting that first little breathing room. What I guess the question is, what has helped you guys to persist and to kind of get to the point where you're at right now, to see some great wins, but also just enjoy the time that you've had building this as well?
Yeah, I think self-care is super important. So for me, that's just physically getting outside, getting into the gym. I'm doing something physical 5 to 6 days a week, and that just helps me clear my mind. I mean, if I'm deadlifting in the gym or running up Green Mountain, I mean, I'm not thinking about anything else in that moment. And the physical is almost a means of being able to clear kind of just my mind, which is always rolling over in these various different challenges and struggles, and also a lot of the wins that we're having in Mad Cap. So that's almost like a forced meditation practice in a way. When I'm breathing so hard and my heart rate's 170 and I'm going up a mountain, it's like I'm not thinking about anything else besides how to breathe in that moment. So that for me has been really important. I'd also say Really just getting things on the calendar in terms of like vacations or trips or adventures to just disconnect. So, at the beginning of the year, call it an end of the previous year, I'll work to just pinning down, multiple weeks and long weekends and just put it on the calendar to then just have these opportunities to just unplug for a little while. Like my wife and I are taking 2 weeks in August. We're going to do, Iceland and Norway, and I'm not going to work at all. And if, the team needs to connect, they, can text me, but I'm not going to be checking my email. I'm just going to entirely unplug. And I think being able to do that in a way that like forces me to go, allows me to not make an excuse that I should just cancel it or bump it or push it. We're always going to be busy. There's an endless to-do list, and it's never going to get shorter. It's probably only going to get longer. So then it's learning how to put in the right relationship to that never-ending just task machine that just keeps throwing more and more things on my plate. So those are a few ways that at least I try to take care of my mind and body in order to, not burn out and to keep pushing. And there's, within these like cycles of, day to day, week to week, there's all these different, there's like overlapping sine waves, that I go throughout an individual day, throughout a week, throughout a year, that I try to have different moments to be able to ebb and flow between driving really hard and then also resting and relaxing really hard. But those are a couple of the strategies that I use to, at least stay sane through all of this.
Yeah. Mine, I have an incredible wife, Nicole, and I know that Brandon has Lily. And man, without that life partner and that rock, I think I'm speaking for both of us. Like, man, I would just not be who I am. And so, I'm very yang and she's very yin. Like in terms of Enneagram numbers, I'm a 7, she's a 9. And we just have this like positive, negative charge that attracts, but is very different. And, she's been my rock really through it all. And so, yeah, that's probably been the most important thing in my life, has been having her to keep me grounded and calibrated. And, it's that's been number one. Number two, is this like, it's self-care. I think I'm just really starting to learn how to do it in earnest. I think I've played that martyr role, that overexhaustion role. I know it really well. And, just in the past 3 years, I've found 3 mentors in my life. One is sort of executive coach, like it sort of cheapens. It's much deeper than that. I have a meditation coach, this guy Murph, who is so serious with me. He's basically like, Phil, if you commit to working with me and you don't show up, you will never see me again. And, and you're like, whoa, okay. What's that all about? So like really figuring out like what devotion to self looks like and deconstructing the idea that self-care is selfish, but it actually is like, it's the way that we can show up fully in the world. And so whether it's meditation or exercise or, adventure days, I begin to wobble very quickly if I break those devotional routines. And, I think Brandon's the same because I know about him, right? Like we're pretty darn committed to those devotional routines, and they just bring us that groundedness and sanity to show up every day with compassion, curiosity, a drive to productivity. I would say that those are the biggest things.
That's great. I get so much of a conversation around this topic for entrepreneurs. And I don't even try to get into this conversation. I think it's just something that regenerative entrepreneurs are really struggling with right now, with where we're at in our world and the things that we've been going through the last several years with the global pandemic. The world, we kind of take on a lot more than than I think, someone that's not thinking about these things, that these bigger problems with, very extractive farming systems, extractive industries, and exploitation of communities and people. We're taking on a lot more, and so there has to be a deeper conversation and a deeper realization of our self-care. And I like how you put it, that devotion to ourself has to be enough. You have to be fully devoted to your cause, but also to yourself, right? Or else it's just not going to happen. And I see that so much. So thank you for sharing the way that you've been able to get to this point. And now I'm a little excited and a little curious as well. Like you're getting to that point where you're in that orbit phase, right? The orbit shot. Tell us maybe a little bit of what that orbit shot looks like, but also what does it look like to get to the moon, to the stars? What are you guys planning on? I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, I'd say the next big hurdle that we're trying to cross to get into orbit is a successful fundraise of our second fund. So we're raising a $50 million fund too. We have some great early anchor investors, got some great farmers we're working with. And the reason that this fund is important is it gets us to profitability and being a break-even business. It puts us in a position of surviving and being a much more resilient entity. And it gives us the opportunity to step back a little bit, slow down a little bit, and also think about what our next best steps are from a business and long-term, growth standpoint. Really are, because our mission is to, from a numeric standpoint at Mad Cap, is to be financing 5 million acres of farmland by 2032. So there's going from 0 to 1, zero just being an ideal land and Mad Cap being a theory and thinking about capital access as being a problem, to then raising the first fund, raising a seed round, and then raising the second fund and being a profitable business. That was a monumental effort to get us to this point. And then to take us from there to actually financing 5 million acres is going to be another 5 to 10 year journey. And we want to make sure that with all the lessons and wisdom we've been able to harbor over the last few years, that we're really putting that to good use. So we think that the next step beyond that will be a larger, more evergreen structured funding vehicle. So right now we raise what are called 10-year closed-ended funds, which are not necessarily aligned with nature and agriculture, which is perpetual and going to exist for the next millennia to come and beyond humanity. So we want to create a funding vehicle that isn't limited by time and allows us to work with these longer term projects. So an evergreen open-ended fund, it could exist hypothetically for forever, or at least for centuries, where we can raise capital, deploy that capital into farmers' hands, and then investors can redeem as they're looking for liquidity out of the fund. So we think that the kind of the next big hump after this second fund is raising a $250 million fund 3, starting at the 250 and then perpetually fundraising our way upwards, and then along the way likely making some micro pivots in market focus and how we end up structuring loans to farmers. But we think that could be the vehicle that then takes us to the moonshot mission, at least over the next decade, to be financing 5 million acres of farmland. But beyond that, I'll let Phil maybe lay out more of the vision that we've set out for MAD, which can go far beyond financing 5 million acres of farmland.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts there. One, just reiterating the kind of orbit shot is 50 million raised and default alive. If we can not go back out to market and raise another equity round in the top co, it'd be really, really good. I do not like the venture treadmill. And so we are really doing everything we can to reach break even. And it really is in that spirit of self-care, right? We know that if we reach break even, we can support the salaries and the team and the farmers, and we can steward what we've done without having to stress about constantly raising that money to support ourselves. And so that's the orbit. Yeah, the moon, the 5 million acres that Brandon's talking to is kind of positioned within this theory of change that we would love Mad Ag to be one of the core people responsible, a core organization responsible for creating what we feel like is a tipping point in the revolution. So if you look, it's somewhere around that 10% zone of adoption. There are some challenges there, but if we can crest that 10% zone of adoption, there is a very strong likelihood that there will be an inevitability to the revolution. And so we're really kind of, gunning for that tipping point in the way that Mad Capital, Mad Markets, and Mad Ag are working collectively as a force. And so within those teams, we've kind of divvied up like, hey, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this. Let's go at it holistically together. And so some of that underlining theory of change really relates to the numbers of acres that are transformed, the numbers of farmers that have adopted it, and stuff like that. So we can get into that if you want, but that's what drives those kind of quant numbers that we're shooting for. And then, beyond that, I think it's interesting to think about where we could go from there. I mean, I think that by the time, if we hit those quantitative goals of 10 million acres total in 10 years, I think the organization is going to have this really wide diversity of ways that we work. So for instance, in Mad Capital, right now, we have an awesome private credit solution for organic regenerative farmers, yet we can't serve all the farmers that we want to be able to serve, just because we can't possibly underwrite, oyster farms. We just don't know how. Mm-hmm. I would love to underwrite an oyster farm. We can't underwrite a lot of specialty crops and perennial things right now that are long-term, like chestnut forests. We don't have the right capital that to match to that. We're like a first-time farmer that lacks equity. We have some limitations of what we can do. So I think as we grow, I would love for us to proliferate our financial solutions as it comes to Mad Capital. And I think the same kind of proliferation of services is going to happen at Mad Ag and Mad Markets as well. And so, yeah, I think 10 years from now, I would love for us to hit those big kind of acreage and land goals. And I'd also love for us to be working internationally. I feel like there's a ton of opportunity to take the lessons that we've learned here and start moving them across the world. And, in the spirit of self-care, I would love to work in Europe and have an office in Barcelona. Sounds amazing. Yeah. Why not dream about it, right? And so, so we're sort of really tied to the decadal strategy that we have in place around impact and scale. And then at the same time, there's this kind of again, living the questions, what do we want to grow into? And I think what I would say too, in the spirit of the entrepreneurial journey, is, and this is what Brandon has really brought to this team and across the org, is focusing on one thing and doing it really well so that it drives very clear impact and value, and using that success as a stepping stone to do the second thing. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy in the entrepreneurial creative mess to want to do it all at the same time. And I think that there's a real discipline in that focus, that what happens is I was talking to someone from Australia yesterday, and they're like, listen, you guys are the go-to company for transition finance. And I'm like, I think we are. I think we have transition finance down. And so it's nice to be known for that. And from that position, now we can build out and go, oh, we're going to do infrastructure. We're going to do equipment loans. We're going to do mortgages. And so, that sort of focus, do one thing well, use it as a stepping stone, I think is a lot of our internal mantra here. And so that's just another kind of flavor around both the entrepreneurial journey and then the mechanism or the vehicle or the way of being, to get to that orbit shot, moon shot, sort of galactic shot.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Both of you kind of hit some of the things that I was hoping that you would hit, of where would I like to see you guys? One thing, I'm in Panama, so I'd love to see you guys here in Central America, maybe, or doing some different loans in in areas that are seeing a lot of deforestation and different things right there. And the other side of that was like, I would love to see you guys figure out ways to finance, early startup farms. And I would also love to see you guys do more agroforestry and more perennial stuff like that. That would just be amazing to kind of see you guys evolve into those places. So it sounds like there's so much potential. I personally found you through a friend that was like, got really excited that there was someone in this transition funding phase, right? And he's like, man, you got to take a look at this. And then I started looking at it. I'm like, I got to talk to them. So I reached out to Brandon, or I can't remember. I think I reached out to both of you, and Brandon answered. I'm like, yes. And then we finally got our conversation today. So thank you for taking the time to share your story, the journey that you've been on, and how it kind of led you to this point. These entrepreneurs that are listening, they're doing so many different things. They are taking on a lot. And they probably do maybe still feel some burnout. So I think we talked to them in that mode for sure. But what I would really like to end this conversation on is like, what would you hope for them to take away from the story? Obviously, they're going to take what they need from it, but what would you hope that they take away from the story that you shared today?
I would say that building a company or building an organization or building anything that is ambitious and risky takes time, and having the ability to just build it brick by brick and having the patience to build it brick by brick is absolutely critical. When I graduated college back in 2016, I biked across the country from Boston to Portland, Oregon, and sitting there on the coast with having just dipped my toes in the Atlantic Ocean, thinking that we were somehow going to make it all the way across the country, the Pacific Ocean, in a matter of a couple of months, just seemed daunting and almost impossible. Like there was so much room for error. Could have got hit by a car, bike could have had a major mechanical issue, weather, health issues, whatever it may be. But, every day we just woke up, we pedaled, literally pedal by pedal. And day by day, we ended up moving our way across the entire United States, 3,500 miles, did it in 54 days, and we got there, and we got to the ocean. And it was actually this interesting moment when we got to the ocean where it was exciting and satisfying to have done it, but there wasn't this like explosion of like, we just won the lottery, or this big moment of like, we did it. We actually realized that like when we got to the ocean, we're looking at the Pacific, that it was the adventure and the journey along the way that really was the exciting part. And that's what it was really all about. So two things that, and I know that's kind of cheesy, enjoy the ride, not necessarily the outcome, but it's true. So I'd say a couple of things to take away would just be to focus, build it brick by brick, and eventually you can get there. But we even think, when we get to 5 million acres of farmland financed, 10 million acres as a mad entity, it'll be a success and it'll feel great, but it's not gonna solve any of the internal ailments of like, we finally did it. Okay, now we can rest and be happy the rest of our lives. Like we have to learn to live and enjoy it along the way. So those are a couple of life lessons that I've learned along the way that I think are important to ruminate on.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah, here's a kind of a disorganized list. One is like care for yourself and figure out what that means. What does devotion to your own well-being look like? And it's a slightly different thing than discipline. Discipline, you can beat yourself up if you miss a day of working out with discipline. Devotion looks at yourself with curiosity and compassion. So that if you miss that day of meditation, you go, oh man, what was up? What do I need to adjust? Maybe I didn't need it that day. And so I really like this kind of shift from discipline, devotion, and self-care. Don't carry the weight of the world. Focus on the things you can change. Kind of the Stoic philosophy of like, the news will crush you. So dabble lightly, be a global citizen, but focus on your locus of control, so that you can feel really rewarded by the things that you're stewarding and the fruits you can bear. I would say find some like true believers, whether they're funders or donors, investors, whether they're team members. Like, you can't do it alone. One of the greatest things is having Brandon be the CEO of Mad Capital and having a team right behind this door that we're talking behind, cranking and working. And so, I think that like a lot of founders have trouble letting go of maybe expectations of themselves, or letting go of big ideas or projects, the sunk cost fallacy. Like, I've been at this for 2 years, and you're afraid to wipe the whiteboard clean and let it go. And I think like letting go and getting good at letting go, is a really good practice. And there's actually a lot of like Buddhist wisdom in letting go of like, you got to feel the whole thing, the shadow, the light, the goodness. And then when you let it go, you got to really let it go. Like, you can't hold that resent and harbor that like edge of like the hooks that can find their way into you. And so I think being able to sort of let go across the board, can really be helpful for your own sanity, as well as not burning yourself out. So those are those kind of 3 nuggets that just came to mind.
Right on. So good. It's been a great pleasure to be able to hear your journey, and then to be able to get this out to other entrepreneurs. Thanks for taking the time again. For our audience that wants to follow what you're doing, maybe get involved, reach out if they're farmers, or just be in tune with your work, how can we stay in touch? How can we keep on following the journey?
Yeah, I'd say the best way is the website, madcapital.com. We have a contact form on there if anyone wants to get in touch. Also LinkedIn, fairly active on there. We post on Mad Capital's webpage pretty frequently. Then Mad Agriculture is also another portal, so you can check them out on Instagram. Mad Agriculture has a newsletter. They also have a LinkedIn to follow along. So I would just get plugged into all the different Mad entities. We've got a variety of messages that we're putting out there, whether it's access to capital or markets or more of the storytelling cultural work. But yeah, Google Mad and you'll find us. Yep.
Right on. For those that are listening, we'll get those in the show notes as well, so you can head over to the description of this podcast, as well as the website for the landing page for this podcast. So thanks again, Brandon. Thanks again, Phil. Dude, it's been a pleasure to really get to know you. Looking forward to following your journey. And bye for now, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, and it really is a blessing and a pleasure to bring each episode to you. So what'd you think? If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review or follow us on the podcast platform of your choice. Each review really does help us further the reach of this podcast and move our mission forward to build regenerative economies in every bioregion. If you have a suggestion or feedback for us, please let us know in the open and free Regenerative Business Economies ecosystem, known as RegenB, which is linked in the description and in the show notes of this episode. RegenB also has an awesome community request form that allows you to suggest guests. Register to be a guest on the podcast and share your own Regenpreneur startup story or any other suggestion you might have for the community. Without your feedback and requests, this podcast and community wouldn't be what it is, so please let us know. Now, this may be bye for now, but remember, it doesn't end here. It has only just begun. The regenerative economies of the future start now with you.